the radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Monday, October 28th. I'm really excited about the show today. This is part of the, a theme about positive shows, and what could be more positive than a show with Gene talking about motivation by love. So thank you, Gene, for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Yaron. Thanks for having me.
So just some organizational stuff quickly. I know I didn't do a show earlier today, but I will be doing shows for the rest of the week. At least I assume so. So timing will be flexible because I'm doing a lot of physical therapy, and that's kind of screwing up my schedule these days. But there will be a show tomorrow, probably around 2 or 3 p.m. East Coast time. All right, let's jump in with Gene. So motivation by love. What do you even mean by that? What is meant by that?
Yeah, so this is a term that Ayn Rand uses in like 1 or 2 places and doesn't say that much about, but turns out to be very, very important. It's the idea that when you have any goal or any emotion you have, you need to actually understand it in terms of values. You need to see everything that you are after in terms of the values to be gained, to be kept, and to be created, as opposed to threats that need to be avoided or mitigated or destroyed. And it makes a huge difference, and it turns out to be a subtler point than you think. You really need to go to fundamentals.
So say a little bit about the connection between, so it sounded like motivation by values.
Yes.
So connect motivation by values to motivation by love. Because, motivation by love sounds a little hippie. Yes. And a little emotionalist or whatever. But objectivism has a clear view of love that is very objective. So what is the connection between love and values?
Right. So love is the emotion that you feel when you contemplate that something is of value to you, that something is a source of pleasure and a source of other values. And it's like the simplest emotion. It's probably, I think, developmentally, probably the first emotion that is experienced. When once values form, the way they form is by experiencing love toward the thing. And then you actually start forming expectations that, hey, if I can get that person to come here, or if I can get that bottle here, I'm going to have some pleasure. And then you get desire. But I actually think qua emotions, that's probably the first one that forms in a baby. So it's very fundamental, and it has to do with emotions being a product of recognizing some kind of value situation. The memory is set up so that you can form expectations of whether good things are going to happen or bad things are going to happen. And the structure that organizes that is values, things that are generally a source of pleasure, and of course, the reason they're a source of pleasure is because they're tied to life. That's where you need Ayn Rand's ethics.
Sure. So what goes wrong? Because that sounds right. So we all kind of develop in this way, but it does seem like we live in a culture, we're just before an election, so this seems particularly relevant, where everybody seems to be motivated by fear, by anger, by very negative emotions, and by, in a sense, protecting yourself from those emotions or those disvalues. So how do we go from motivated by values and as very little children to this protecting ourselves from bad stuff as the primary?
Well, it's because they don't know Ayn Rand all the way down. That's really what the problem is. But to be a little more concrete, see, if you have values, you will have threat-oriented emotions, right? If you love your mother and you desire her to come and she starts leaving the room, you're going to be upset. Oh, what happened? You're going to be upset about that. So all of the emotions, both the positive ones and the negative ones, the ones that direct your attention to values and that direct your attention to threats, arise as soon as you have values. I mean, I think values are the fundamental psychological structure. There are occasionally a few structures that are organized around threats, but that's very unusual in a person's psychology. So if you have values, you will feel fear some of the time. You will feel anger some of the time. You will feel, hopelessness or guilt. I mean, well, guilt only if you do something wrong, but you will feel sadness. You will lose values. We aren't Pollyannas who think you live in the best of all possible universes and you're going to be happy all the time. That's not, happiness is not, you feel joy and positive emotions all the time. That's not what happiness is.
Yep.
So I think the problem is, first of all, people take the emotions at the face value. And the threat-oriented emotions, like let's take specifically fear and anger, they draw your attention to the threat. This person is bad, or that, inflation is bad. This is going to be bad for me. And they stop right there. So the emotion is designed, or not designed. Adam Reed actually gave me the better word, has evolved to drag your attention to its object. And the value-oriented emotions drag your attention to a value. So if you're feeling love, you know what the value is because it's this person you have a crush on or whatever it is. If you're feeling desire, you know what the value is. If you're feeling joy, you know the value you just got because it draws your attention to that. But if it's a threat, the threat-oriented emotion, it draws your attention to the threat, not the value. And if you don't take the time to understand where does this come from, you don't actually understand why it's important to you. You just see it superficially. And that's why I think the issue of motivation, and I do use the term motivation by values more than motivation by love because it gets rid of the emotionalism confusion, is really an issue of learning to think in principle and going to the fundamental. What is your fundamental motivation? Because every threat is a threat to a value, but it can take thinking to figure out what is threatened.
So, how important is this distinction between motivation by fear, motivation by love, kind of in our own psychology? I mean, to what extent is this shaping how we behave and what we feel, what our emotions are?
Well, so actually, I don't see it that way. I don't see it as a static issue. I actually see it as this distinction gives you a power tool for being able to live a rationally selfish life. Because if you see that you're experiencing some threat-oriented emotion, and which there is no shame in feeling a threat-oriented emotion, let me just make clear, we are not opposed to feeling emotions. In fact, it's the first step to understanding what they are. If you just block them out, you will never know what actually motivates you. But if you are experiencing a threat-oriented emotion and you understand this, you can say, oh, okay, I'm going to need to take a couple extra steps to understand what's really going on here. And you can see this. I mean, we should probably get a couple of examples in here,
Yep.
but one person who is afraid they're going to lose a sale, say a real estate person, they're afraid they're going to lose a sale. And one person, you ask why. The way you get to the fundamental is you ask why? Why are you afraid if you're going to lose a sale? Well, I'm going to lose money. Well, I won't have money. Well, why do you want money? It sounds positive, right? I want money. Well, why do you want money? Well, a lot of people are motivated by fear around money. Well, if I don't have money, what am I going to do to eat? I'm going to be, I'm going to be starving or whatever. Now, that's very different from someone who is afraid they're going to lose the sale. And they say, well, why am I afraid to lose the sale? And they'll say, well, I've put a lot of effort into this. I've really tried to figure out what this person's, that this is a good fit for them. And all that time will be lost. And then they can say, wait a second here. That effort that I did to understand their values is not lost. That's actually things I learned. I learned how to figure out someone's values. This is going to help me with the next sale. Oh, I learned something in this. Okay. And suddenly you see that losing this sale is not opposed to you making the next sale. You actually see that this is part of a process of you growing and learning and fighting for your values. And you want, because you believe in the trader principle, you only want to make the sale if it is the best house for them to buy, right? Totally. And both people start in a funk And one of them stops when they get to, oh no, I'm not going to have enough money. Now you can go on, if you keep going on about the fear of money, you can actually eventually get to values. But if you stop at a threat, you're going to be in that narrow thing. That's what motivates people to try to control other people and manipulate them.
In what way?
Well,
Explain that.
oh no, if I don't get this, I'm not going to have the money. I have to do something. I have to get them to buy. And now suddenly all second-handedness is motivated by fear. It's if I can't take care of myself, so they have to behave differently in order for me to be happy. All second-handedness is motivated by fear.
Okay.
And can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world, folks. So this is my switcheroo on thinking about psychology. Okay, so you uncover that one of your reasons is second-handed. Go a little deeper, because you can always get to a rational value about, there's always a way to get to a rational value. You just have to keep digging deeper until you get to a fundamental value.
So say more about that. What does that mean? So if I discover there's a second-handed motivation here, how do I go from there to a rational value?
Right. So
let's concretize it with that salesman example.
Right. So he's now thinking, I've got to get this guy to behave properly. Right. So now let's make up why so it's different for every person. So this is, I think, very important. We're just doing these examples. This has to be done by the person experiencing the emotions.
Yep.
Because the particular circuitous route where you got to that emotion is highly individual. This is why psychologizing is a mistake. You can say, generally speaking, this is a second-handed response, but to figure out exactly how to sort it out, that person needs to track it down. So let's just make up something, right? So suppose this person is like, oh no, I won't be able to take care of myself. I've got to make this person do it. And they're an objectivist. They say, oh my God, that's second-handed. I'm trying to control them. So the self-critical, which is also motivated by fear, like, oh no, there's something wrong with me. I'm second-handed. Now they really aren't going to be doing what they need to do to make a sale. But supposing instead they said, gee, I really want to be able to have this. I like real estate. I like being a real estate broker. It's got so much freedom. I love looking at houses. I love figuring out these kinds of things. And I need to make this career work. And again, there's more fear, right? Oh my God, if this doesn't work, I have to make money. What am I going to do? So you keep going and you say, well, what do I need? Okay, I believe in the trader principle. So I need a trade with people. It's not that I need to control them. I need some way to make sure that our values are aligned. Okay, it's cooperation that I really need. So we're now actually, if you want to control someone, the deep rational value you're actually after is cooperation. And that is a different concept, and conceptualizing it differently makes all the difference. Because once you get to cooperation, you see, oh, it needs to be win-win. And this is going to then motivate you to understand, well, why doesn't this person want it? Why is it not a win for him? And this is going to get you to see, do I really want it to be win-lose? No, I don't. You can actually project, gee, if it were win-lose, I would feel terrible for taking this person's money. And at this point, you now have the right perspective to be able to be, first of all, okay if you don't close the sale. And second of all, be in a position, maybe you can recover the sale, because maybe the reason it's not, this person doesn't, you may have figured out, let's say that in your head, you have figured out this is the perfect house for this person, and they really don't get it. Well, now you can say, gee, client, I thought this was the perfect house for you because of this, and you said this, and I saw this. And what's going to happen? They're going to be like, oh yeah, wow, you're right. You're pointing out things I hadn't noticed. I hadn't realized that. Or they'll say, oh, I said that to you, but I think that's important because you noticed this, this, and this. Oh, well, then you need house B, right? It will actually start the communication because you focus on the values. When you focus on values, you can actually see more ways to get what you want. When you focus on fundamental values, because they're abstract and they're general, there are more ways to make money than closing this particular sale at this particular second.
So, so how do you think, how do people figure this out? How do they figure out if they're motivated by values or by fear or threats?
So first of all, it's in a particular incident. And I wouldn't like worry about this. I mean, normally you're living your life and things are going well, but if something seems to be off, if you're having threat-oriented emotions, then you need to introspect them. And it really, all you do is you keep asking why. And I actually think that the tool that I offer, it's okay for me to promote. I have this free, it's called the Thinking Directions Starter Kit. It's on my website at thinkingdirections.com. And one of the resources in that starter kit is a list of what I call deep rational values. And I find this is like a cheat sheet of things that if you get to this, you know that the thing you're after is essentially rational. And let me just give you, let me just list some of the things that are on here. Clarity, understanding, organization, concentration. Those are under the clarity category.
And maybe again, why don't you concretize that? So what, clarity about what?
Right.
What
So
exactly
like suppose let's go to this real estate person. I'm just going to make it up. Suppose this real estate person realized the reason it was so upset about not closing the sale is he's got some self-doubt about, I never can seem to close sales and I don't know why. And that's what it's like, something's wrong with me because I don't know how to handle the closure process. There's something I don't know. Oh, the value there is he wants actually understanding or clarity about what is the problem here. And that might actually permit him to have a really vulnerable, open conversation. Gee, I really thought that this was going to lead to it. Can you tell me why you don't think it's going to work? I'm not going to pressure you anymore. But he could get the understanding that he realizes he lacks, if that's the way his thinking went. Clarity would be the thing that he was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
We did another one where cooperation was the thing he was looking for. Let me just give you one more big category. See, and you don't know which one you're going to get to until you follow your own chain. And that's why I think it's a cheat sheet, basically.
Yep.
8 basic categories. Let me just give you the basic categories. And they're clarity, direction, and efficacy, which are very closely related to reason, purpose, and self-esteem. Health, I think those 4 are fairly straightforward. Then there are 3 social ones: connection, communication, and cooperation. And then I put in rationality because I think the virtues, all the virtues, if you can get to, hey, this is an issue of independence, or this is an issue of justice. Like if you get, oh, I really want to have trade here, this is an issue of justice. Mm-hmm. When you get to that, if you value justice, that like clarifies you and say, okay, this is what I want in this moment. This is what I'm going for. I know that that's good for me.
So to what extent to be motivated by love and to live based on that, do you need to be an objectivist, or do you need to be well educated in objectivism? Do you really need to know the philosophy?
Well, so again, I don't use it in that global sense, Yaron. I don't say, oh, this person as a whole is motivated by love, or this person as a whole is motivated by fear. I see it as situational, okay? Now, are there non-objectivists who I would say are fundamentally motivated by gaining values? And yes, I absolutely think that's the case. And I do think that some people have actually a lot of common sense about this, about how to, there's a lot of hand-wavy stuff out there. Like you may have heard of like the law of attraction, which is, it's based on a leap of faith and a very poor understanding of quantum mechanics, right? Okay. I mean, it's theoretically completely nuts. And yet what practical advice they give is that you need to really understand your goal and why it matters to you and see how you could get it in the world. And it gets some people very, very value focused. So people who are like really mixed up philosophically can glom onto this, and it's got just a couple of rationalizations, and then it turns out to be fairly practical because the actual practical advice is better explained by motivation by values than their kind of nutty stuff. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of practical advice out there. If it actually works, and you unpack it, you can see, I can understand this philosophically better if I look in terms of motivation by values. And so I think mixed people tend to be mixed, and the better ones have better areas. And also people tend to have areas where they're motivated by values, and then areas where they're motivated by fear. I mean, the absolute typical thing is really great producers, totally like entrepreneurs who have built amazing companies, whose politics or relationships are totally motivated by fear.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say, I mean, you can't really be an entrepreneur, particularly in a highly competitive business, without being motivated by values, without being really oriented around values and driven by values.
Right. I totally believe that's right. And not only that, if you read all of the entrepreneurial books, all the business books by entrepreneurs, they have conceptual. I mean, that's how I learned a lot of this stuff. It's trying to build my own business and reading business books. And I realized, oh, yes. And putting that together with, pop psychology, that's one of the ways that I honed in on this. I think this is the fundamental issue. This is the fundamental issue for managing your own motivation. Understanding this distinction and understanding you actually have control over whether you're motivated by values or threats all the time. This is an issue. This is, if you notice that you're motivated by threats, you have volitional control over what you're paying attention to. And really what it comes down to is activating a different context. You need to stop, do some introspection, figure out what the values are, and then proactively activate a value-oriented context. And if you do that, happiness goes up, you achieve your goals, your relationships are better, everything gets better if you do that. And the more systematically you can do, I mean, it's a skill. And it's easier to do it in the little cases and harder to do it in the harder cases, but it's a learnable skill.
And it's another manifestation of kind of our volitional capability. The fact is that we control our own soul, right?
We do.
We are what we are.
We only have a very limited actual volition, which is, I mean, Lee Pearson talks about this, and Harry talks about this, Harry Binswanger. You really, you have the ability to direct attention, but that leads you to the ability to form concepts. And that leads you to the ability to organize your knowledge. And that leads you to the ability to activate an entire context. And when you have that, when you have an integrated, I mean, this gets to...
And to ask the whys, right?
Ask the whys. Every time you ask the whys, and every time you get to a why you disagree with, you actually reintegrate that part of your values. And ultimately, if you do this consistently, you integrate your values, so your value hierarchy is all consistent. And then first of all, you have less conflict, and second of all, it's easier to prioritize.
So it's not true that there's just some people who are motivated by fear and hate, and some people who are just motivated by love. These are consequences of choices, and they can be reversed.
Yes, it's consequences of choices, and a person who is clearly motivated by fear here in this moment can be turned around. There are exceptions, and you need to be willing to try to understand their context. And that needs to be worth it to you. It needs to be selfish to talk to this individual. And I think one of the problems is, of course, it is individual, and it's difficult to turn around a whole audience who's motivated by fear, because each one of them has a slightly different fear. But of course, part of what you do is clarify certain of the fears are not rational fears, right? The more you do that, the more you're actually giving ammunition for someone who says, I'm actually just afraid of having foreigners here. And that's nuts. These are people that I could trade with, and more people, more trade is good. And then you can actually see this is coming from I don't actually agree with this. And that is, of course, the first step is seeing this emotion is coming from something I don't agree. What I really want here, and name some rational value, go after that. Now, over time, you can disintegrate if you have wrong ideas and wrong values. I mean, really irrational things stored as values that are irrational. Over time, you can reintegrate that.
Yeah, and sadly, so many people, what they do is rationalize.
Yes.
Right? They realize they're wrong, but they they come up with excuses to justify the original emotion because that's what they're hanging on to that.
Well, and I have a more benevolent view of rationalization too. I mean, I think one of the reasons people rationalize is they don't realize how easy it is to shift this around. And that's because of all the wrong theories of psychology out there that basically treat it as, well, if you have this emotion, that reflects on your soul. And that's not the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your soul is self-made, and you can decide now to be rational, and you can be rational from here on in. You're going to have a lot of emotional conflict. It's going to be unpleasant. It's going to take some, work on your part, but you can make that decision. And that's not obvious to people. People think, oh no, I'm second-handed. Oh no, what do I do about this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, woe is me. That actually puts you into a threat-oriented context, and you don't actually
Well, part of the
form
problem
the
is
first-handed values.
they might think, oh, I'm second-handed, but they don't want to hold that. They don't want to face that.
Of course not.
So they rationalize, they kind of cover it up in a sense. They come up with rationalizations that present it as non-second-handed.
Well, I mean, so that's one thing, right? I mean, this can be done consciously.
Yeah.
And it can also be done just, oh my God, they're so unpleasant. They just avoid that issue.
Yep.
And if you consistently avoid an issue, you become really stupid in that area because you have no knowledge, no skill, and no values in that area. And surprise, surprise, their thinking in that area is incredibly superficial and illogical, and they don't even know it because they've got this big gap in their knowledge and value context.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So sometimes there's reason to be afraid, and sometimes there are, negative things going on. How do you keep a value orientation or motivation even through love, even in situations where fear is appropriate?
Yes. So again, feeling fear is not the problem, right?
Yep.
The problem is not understand, basically using the superficial motivation instead of understanding the deeper motivation. So, I mean, I think, is it too heavy to talk a little bit about Israel versus Hamas?
No.
Because this is a great example, right? That you need to go all the way down. Like, Israel wants to destroy Hamas. This is not a creative act, right? Are they motivated by threat? Well, fundamentally, they're motivated by a desire to preserve life, preserve freedom, and by the recognition that Hamas is essentially trying to destroy the good. If Hamas weren't initiating trying to destroy the entire country, if that weren't their actual reason, it would not make sense to want to annihilate them, right? There's a line in this is in the government thing. Government is inherently negative. This is on page, God, I guess I'm going to have to put on my glasses. I can't read the page number. I can read the text, but not the page number. I don't have my glasses on. Page 366. Government is inherently negative. The power of force is the power of destruction, not of creation. And it must be used accordingly, i.e., only to destroy destruction. Only to destroy destruction. And that is what they are doing. And it's not that there's never a case where you would have destruction as your goal, but it needs to be in the context of protecting a huge value, and it needs to be under, objective use of force, and it needs to be because you are destroying destruction. The two basic motivations are either creation or destruction. And there are people, this is the exception, there are people who are fundamentally motivated to destroy. And that is the essence of evil. That is anti-life. That is really, truly anti-life. And that needs to be cut out of your world. And if they initiate force, it needs to be destroyed. And that's a value-oriented view to the use of force. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yep.
right? It's not, and this is why, I think like the soldiers for the US, they take pride in protecting their country and protecting freedom. They believe, you read stories of these guys and they see that they're on an important mission to protect the world. They really are. They really do believe that. And that's not the motivation of the people who are in there, shooting up the rock concert. It was not to save the world. It was glee over destruction. That is evil. And that is a total motivation by destruction. And unfortunately, there's some cultures that foster a desire to destroy, which I think is the real, that's the real problem, is that we're seeing pockets where that is being fostered. That didn't used to be fostered. That used to be shunned. It seems to me, at least in like the US.
I mean, how would you apply this to the student demonstrators at Columbia, let's say, who are chewing on destruction, who are supporting destruction? I mean, because they're not in a pocket of a culture like that. They're supposedly in America, a culture that values, but they have picked it up at university, so their professors are advocating for an anti-values destructive ideology. But it has to be more than that, because a healthy person would rebel against their professors, would walk out.
Yes, and there's I guess I need to understand what you want to talk about with respect to psychology here, because I'm not going to psychologize them all together, but you want to try to understand the psychology of some of them, or?
I'm trying to understand. So, Hamas, you could argue, okay, they grew up in a culture which venerates destruction. So how do you get a psychology of nihilism?
Right. Okay, got it.
In a relatively, not completely healthy, but we wish, but in a kind of sane Western, relatively healthy culture, how do you get nihilism psychologically? How do you get that psychology?
It's the evil of altruism. It's absolutely the evil of altruism. This is altruism and second-handedness, which go together, right? That if you think that, in effect, you have no right to exist, right? That's part of altruism. And you've got to be, you have to be helping the poor or the weak, whatever it is. If you actually accept that to any significant degree, first of all, you don't actually form your own firsthand values, because everything has to be justified by helping the weak, right? And so, I mean, actually, this can be untangled. I'm a reformed altruist, so you can untangle this, so I could explain that later. But so this is one problem. So then the second problem is that this puts you in opposition to disapproval. Disapproval from other people becomes the worst thing, right? It's like, if you don't belong, first of all, you can't achieve, it's a prescription for self-doubt, and you can't get your values. Someone has to give you the values, right? So what happens is you have to find the group that you can fit in. It turns into collectivism. I mean, this is just objectivism, right? If you are a collectivist, there's the group that agrees, and there you feel safe. And there's the others that you don't agree with, and there you don't. And that becomes, people disagreeing with you becomes like the worst thing in the world that you're afraid of. And you avoid it, right? You avoid conflict like crazy. That is, when you avoid something because you think it's intolerable, it's emotionally intolerable. There's nothing that is actually emotionally intolerable, actually. Dying, but then you're not aware and you're not having any emotions, right? There's nothing that is emotionally intolerable. But if you think it would be the end of the world if this happened, I can't, and you do everything you can to avoid it, you actually create super blinders. You totally distort your hierarchy of values. You create blinders. Like, they never learn anything about Israel, about the economy in Israel. People who have this fear of Jews, say. And I think what's happened there is that they found a group, And they're little collectivist kings who have said, these are the things you got to agree with, and anything else, you can't disagree with this. And that creates hatred. That really does create hatred. If being in disagreement with someone, this is the mild version, you think is the end of the world,
Yep.
you're going to hate people who are disagreeing with you. I mean, you've received a hell of a lot of hatred. People are afraid to hear that someone doesn't agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a degree. It takes a degree. I mean, I have a kind of unusual view of self-esteem, but you need to be okay with yourself to hear that someone disagrees with you, say, okay, no problem. I'm not going to work with them. I'm going to work with these people over here where I have something. I'm going to cooperate with them. It's all right that they don't agree with me.
Yep.
That takes a certain kind of emotional maturity. And if you are never taught to introspect, you're never taught anything in fundamentals, you don't understand values, you also have no emotional maturity. So I don't know if this is a big enough explanation for it for you. I actually
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. And anchoring it in altruism, I think is absolutely right.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's going to be altruism and unreason, right? I mean, those are going to be the sources of it. A lack of ability to think and use and apply rationality and an altruistic morality.
Right.
And that's the forces in the world.
Right. And so the altruism gives them the drive, which I use as a negative concept. I don't think rational motivation is a drive. I think it's always a threat-oriented motivation that's a drive. I think it's passion that's rational. Mm-hmm. So that gives them the drive, and then the disminding of them is what makes it so that they don't see through it, and they don't even have the self-awareness to see that they have a completely contradictory position.
Yep.
And that's, I mean, the disminding is what permits the leading of the sheep by the altruist moral code.
Yep.
But so here's my view. So this is supposed to be optimistic. So here's my view. I really do think that even if, one of these kids, say some 20-year-old who's in there, protesting and is all in, such a person can, if they can learn to assert themselves, and they can learn to find the rational element of all of their motivation. And, I'm just going to give it, this is a kind of a crazy example, but I could give personal examples that are like this. Suppose this kid, really is passionate about this and learns how to speak in public and form rallies, right? And because getting the word out is so important, and then realizes this was false, right? I mean, you've seen people with climate change, you've seen people actually realize, Jesus, this was false, right?
Yeah.
That person has actually developed real skills in oratory, organization, those kinds of things. And organization is a deep rational value. Communication is a deep rational value. So that person has actually developed some real rational values and skills. They've been used to the wrong end. And so one of the ways that you heal yourself is say, oh my God, this was wrong and I shouldn't have done it. And I do need to undo that. And even though this was all wrong, I actually did develop this. I have things that I can build on. And that's how you maintain your self-esteem, even when you realize, boy, I was all wrong. I really screwed up there. You find the rational elements that you have in your soul, even though you were off in a wrong direction. You built, if you acted in the world with any practicality at all, you have some rational values that you've developed. You have some skills you've developed. You have some knowledge that you've developed. And learning to actually honor what you have and let go of the mistakes, and rather than criticize yourself, say, okay, then I need to learn this, and I need to develop this value. And that's what a being of self-made soul does. That's what pride, that's what the
Yeah,
virtue of
exactly.
pride.
But it's so, I mean, not to be negative, but it's so rare to find people who acknowledge that they're wrong, and then can see a path and how to grow from that point, right? And
Well,
it's unusual
it's unusual.
in the world in which we live. It's not
This is
impossible.
my campaign, right? We've all got our
Yeah,
campaigns for saving the
that's
world.
right.
See, I think the way in is they have some goal. And they want help getting some big goal that has some glimmer of rationality. It could be actually conceptualized all wrong. But I think that person is trying to assert some kind of a selfish value. And that is a person so this work on really understanding that, I mean, the way that I actually developed the whole value orientation stuff was actually trying to understand how to set goals so that you could actually achieve long-term goals. Long-term goals, the problem with them is if you don't see your progress, if you don't actually get some pleasure from pursuing them, it's very difficult to stay in for the long term. And one of the things the value orientation does is it helps you figure out how the things you're doing now are actually building values and knowledge and skill that you can actually celebrate now, that can give you the pride and the confidence and the joy that motivates you to take the next step, even if your goal is 30 years in the future. And that's all based on, the objectivist ethics, the objectivist epistemology. It's all based on that. It's based on the need for reduce crow overload. It's based on all of that. And I think that that's a way in to get people to see the need to be oriented to values. And I think that is maybe a way in to get people to actually start looking at altruism. And that might be a way to get them to start taking their minds seriously.
So
we all have our ways in, right?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly, I don't think there's one way that'll
Right.
change the minds of everybody. So,
Right.
and it's because the context specific
Yes.
to that individual. So, I mean, my view has always been you got to try a million different things, and hopefully of the million, a few thousand work, and you can get to the right kind of people.
Yes.
And but
this is one of the other reasons I'm excited about my particular way in. And I really respect people have really different views about how to change the world here. But one of the things I like about my view is I have coached people who I think have kind of wacky ideas about how to change the culture. And okay, let's make sure this is rational and is value oriented as opposed to, destroy something or other. And some of those people are being unleashed to do things that I thought were wacky. I don't need to think that it's the right way to go.
Exactly.
But I can teach people how to pursue a goal rationally. And the other thing is, even if the goal is wacky and in fact is impossible, if you pursue it in a rational way, entirely value oriented, first of all, you'll figure that out sooner rather than later. And second of all of your collateral gains will have informed you and help you set a really rational goal. You'll have only beneficent side effects from it.
Yep. So let's go back to motivation by love, and maybe its relationship to Benevolent Universe. It sounds similar, but what is it? The same thing? Is it the same, different perspective on the same thing?
So I don't think it's the same thing at all. It is, it's discussed in Leonard Peikoff's chapter on the Benevolent Universe, or subhead on the Benevolent Universe, and which I think is virtuous practical, right? I think that's the one in the happiness chapter. So this is the difference between a knowledge or belief versus an emotion or a motivation, right? So I do think it's important to believe that the universe is auspicious to human life. I think that's something you need to actually be certain about. And that's an epistemological issue. And the argument for that is partly biological and partly epistemological, right? That you have a brain, you can use your brain. You need to understand that you have enough free will that you can always figure out what a good thing to do is. And you need to accept reality. You need to understand the difference between the metaphysical and the man-made. You need to understand the importance of accepting reality. You really need the first You need the first 8 chapters of OPAR to really
Yeah.
get the benevolent universe premise and to see that it's true. But that's what it is. And of course, it's not, it's that the universe is auspicious to human life. How do we know that? Because we evolved biologically. Our capacities evolved in the universe, right?
Yep.
So there's like a scientific and a philosophical reason why that's true.
And we evolved to survive in the universe.
Yes, exactly. Otherwise, because we're living organisms, we have a means of survival, right? Chapter 6. Okay. So you really need to be sold on that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sold on that, then there's some weird fear in there because there's no logical way to get to the idea that the universe is out to get you. There's a logical way to get to the benevolent universe premise. There's no logical way to get to the malevolent universe premise. And so if you start thinking, oh, the world is out to get me, you know that you have made a mistake in your thinking somewhere and you need to go find it. Now, this is a place where understanding the distinction between motivation by love and motivation by fear can help you. Because the way, in order to, the problem when you notice, gee, I really believe something that Ayn Rand proved is false. What do I do about that?
Yeah.
You know that you've made a mistake, but you don't know where you made the mistake. And one of the difficulties is it's going to be very idiosyncratic. And you're going to need to introspect your emotions to figure out where that came until you understand, every time it comes up, like you feel a despair because, oh, I can't succeed in the universe. That's going to be in a concrete situation. You're going to need to introspect that concrete situation, figure out what you're afraid of right now. Go translate it, figure out what the values are, figure out how you can actually gain values in this situation and move toward them. And that will disintegrate this a little bit. And at some point, you may actually figure out where this came from, at which point you'll say, oh, yeah, that happened. That was pretty awful, but I kind of overgeneralized from there. And then it won't bother, that particular thing won't bother you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't find, I don't believe in going on a search and rescue, trying to go through your whole childhood to figure out where did this come from? That's the error of, like 20 years of psychotherapy.
Yeah.
I believe that the way that you deal with this, when you have some pull, like, oh, it's despair, I can't do anything, the world is out to get me, you say, okay, wait a second, this is threat-oriented, hold on. You introspect that concrete, you figure out how to get values in this concrete situation that reprograms some of your knowledge, some of your values, you develop some more skill, and gradually you sort that out. Now, there are ways to expedite that, I think, but it requires another level of skill. So
what are some of the ways, people can orient themselves towards values? So, because this is a process that people have to figure out and learn. So what are some of the ways to do that? So,
so like if you just notice you're in a bad state and you just want to try to change the context, there are things that you can just do. Like, for example, there's a practice that I've talked about. I call it 3 good things. It was actually introduced to me as a gratitude process. The idea was every day, come up with 3 things that someone else did that was nice for you. Now, it is true. If you do that, you will feel better because you will see, oh, there are people who value me in the world. And and gratitude is a value-oriented emotion. But I immediately went to, okay, wait a second. That's very other focused. Okay, what about, actually, my head coach for the Thinking Lab, Lynn Zinzer, particularly does it as, what are 3 things I did that are good today? And that gets you clearer on your values and your capacity and your efficacy. And this will put you in a better mood. The person who introduced me to this is Martin Seligman. He's a very famous psychologist, and he's the person who started the positive psychology movement in academia. And one of the reasons he told us about it, he said they did a lot of tests to see what actually made people happier. And doing this every day actually made people happier. And why did it make people happier? Because they kept doing it after the experiment was over. Because you do this in like 5 minutes. And I mean, I don't do it. I'm not doing it every day right now. I have other processes, but it's one of the emotional resilience tools that I have people do in my launch program. And if you do this every day, write down 3 good things that happened today, or 3 good things that I did today, or 3 good things that someone did, any of these above, you will end the day in a better mood. You will get instant pleasure, and you will want to do it again the next day. And this will actually help you maintain the context of, oh yeah, I gain values in the world. It actually focuses you on values that you are acting to gain and or keep or create in the world. So just that, you can activate a context in a fairly easy way. I mean, there are other things, any kind of a celebration process, I think. Celebration is a very important process. You know, Ayn Rand says it's more important to reward the good than it is to punish the bad. And I think celebrating accomplishments, you know, celebrating your own accomplishments and really understanding, wow, this is important. And conceptualizing what you've done today and why it's significant, even if the day didn't go well, is actually extremely helpful. So I actually had a bad week last week because my work on my book went down the tubes. And I tell you, this is guaranteed to put me into a bad state. Okay. Yep. It really is. And it took me, it was a bad state. It took me a little while to get out of it. And then when I got out of it, I realized, oh, I see how this relates to some issues. When I first went into this work, I went in because I thought I was broken and needed to get fixed, which is not motivation by love.
No, not at all.
And about 10 years in, I figured out, you know, you really can't have that attitude. That really screws you up, because every setback, you think, oh no, it's the end of the world. And I figured that out 10 years in, but I haven't, you know, to disintegrate something like that, you know, it's 20 years later or whatever, I'm still working to, I disintegrated that one more level this week, and I am very happy about that. So even though the book didn't go well, what I learned from understanding the values, understanding what I was after, understanding what I was afraid of, because there I was afraid of, well, what if I never write this book? Well, you know, that's a real possibility, right? I mean, I could die tomorrow and the book won't be done. So you got to face your fears. And when you face your fears, say, okay, well then so that's a real possibility. Oh yeah, that's honesty, right? Facing possibilities.
Yep.
Then the next step is, okay, so what am I going to do if that's the case? And I realized it's not the end of the world if I don't completely figure this out, because what I've done is going to help someone else to figure it out in the next generation, and that's okay. And that completely changed my attitude, and I'm now again back on a productive path in the book that is not hitting up an obstacle of like, oh no, what happens if I don't get this? You know, and that is a process of celebrating what your accomplishment is, even if what you were dealing with was something difficult, it wasn't going well. You're working through the struggle of that always has something that you have created, some value you've developed, some skill you've developed, some knowledge you've developed, and focusing on that really makes a difference. So that's a very important process. I think mourning is also a very important process. Mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. So bad things happen. You know, I think it's fair to say, whichever person we get for president, some bad things could happen.
Yep.
I mean, right? And it's going to be upsetting, right? And you could actually see, I mean, let's take a simpler case. Let's not do politics. Someone dies, right? Someone you love dies. I mean, this is very upsetting. And it can feel like, you know, my life is never going to be the same. You can really get into despair from that. The thing I recommend in that case is a process of mourning which is a lot like a process of celebration, which is you go and look at what am I never going to have again? And you get clear on like, give me an example of something like, we need an example of something that you might never have again because this person who you love just died. I'm going to come up
You'll
with
never
some.
have the particular interaction you have with this particular person. So
Right.
you won't have the value of friendship, or you won't have that is unique to this particular person.
Right. And so this person is unique. And so I'm thinking like, I lost my mother now some years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And, well, actually it's easier with my father. So one of the things I realized right after my father died is that he had been looking out for me my entire life. Right. And it was gone. It was like gone from the universe. It was really clear and, crying all over the place.
Yeah.
But, but recognizing it in those terms and crying over it and then saying, then I realized, well, wait a minute. My husband looks over after me, worries about me. My sister worries about me. My brother worries about me. My mother, then my mother was still alive. There were people in my life that I didn't have it at the same intensity as my father, but it didn't mean that it wasn't in my life. And that is what heals the wound. And a lot of times when you're mourning a person who you lost, you actually learn really surprising things that you didn't realize you valued about them and that you didn't realize you valued because it was so built in the relationship, particularly your parents. It's so built into the relationship that you don't even know it until it's gone. And then you conceptualize it. But once you know what it is, you can actually act again and keep it. I didn't realize how benevolent my mother was until after she was gone. And, my father was a real curmudgeon. And, he was tough. He was really a tough guy. I loved him. He was also brilliant, funny, amazing. And boy, my mother put up with a lot. And she was so benevolent. And I only conceptualized that after she was gone. And I realized that I want to be that in people's lives. That's something I want to actually embody from her. And it became a bigger part of me after I conceptualized it, which gets to the kind of epistemological point. I think this is understanding your own emotions and where they come from and what values they come from and conceptualizing this. This is where people really need to understand the objectivist epistemology. You really need to be able to go deeper. You need to understand the difference between a concrete and an abstraction. You need to be able to go abstract and then go to a new concrete. And you actually need to be able to think.
In what way is that? So why is that important?
It's important because you lose, what someone you love could be an irreplaceable value. They are a concrete. You will not have that concrete again.
Yep.
But if you can name each aspect, each concrete aspect you've lost, if you can name it abstractly, there is a way that you can get that aspect in some other form somewhere else.
Yep.
And if it's a husband or a wife, it takes a couple of years. And you need to go through every single aspect, and it takes time. And it's a known process. But if you do that, and you do that from the perspective of I'm identifying the values, first of all, you're honoring this person, and the person, you actually will remember them better. And they will have, when you think about them, you will actually feel more love for them because you will be clearer on why they were a value. And you will see, I can get a similar kind of value in my life now. This is so important to me. I'm going to find a way to get that in my life now.
What would you, what do you think about the extent to which, if any, the negative emotions or the emotions motivated by fear, depression, and things like that are driven by, I don't know, chemical imbalances in the brain and might not be directly linked to particular evaluations we've made and particular ideas that we hold?
Well, I think you got to distinguish two causal factors. There are at least two causal factors in your actual affect, right? And One of them is biological. And so chemicals in the brain can definitely affect your affect. Tiredness affects your affect. Tension affects in the body affects your affect. So, there are biological things that cause affect. That's one of the things. And there's an interesting book called The Origin of Everyday Moods by a guy named, his last name is Thayer. And he only looked at that. And I do think that creates the kind of background mood. But if you're having an emotion, like if you're feeling kind of down or low, right? And then you focus on, oh, I didn't get that done yesterday. And you feel guilt, right? Or whatever, just making something up that someone might feel. The particular emotion you have is based on an evaluation. So if you have an actual emotion, it is based on an evaluation and you need to know what it is. Now, it may be more intense guilt. If you're tired and you're tense and other stuff has been going on, you may actually feel a lot stronger guilt than in fact is kind of objectively warranted. And you see this all the time with anger, right? You have a stressful day, you come home, the spouse says something, you snap at them, right? And it's an out of context anger. And it's partly, it was a small thing, which you are irritated by, but normally you'd be mildly irritated and you would still be able to be pleasant. But because you're completely stressed out, your mood is, negative affect is really elevated. It goes up and it triggers a much bigger response. So there is a chemical thing, and I do think that's probably why the drugs help, is that they can moderate the background thing. But my understanding is that people don't really solve depression unless they deal with the thoughts, that you really do need to deal with the thoughts that you're having, because if you keep thinking self-critical thoughts, which we could talk about that, because obviously it's valid to criticize yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
But you need to do it in a value-oriented way. But if you just loop in shame and, telling yourself why you're bad and that kind of thing, or moping about the world or whatever it is, you're not going to get out of the depression.
Yep.
And so there's no way to do that, I think, without actually identifying and challenging the thoughts that are holding that in place. It really is conceptual.
So we've been going for an hour. Let's take a few questions from the audience, and then we'll see where that takes us. And then if there's anything else you want to cover, we can do that as well.
I can talk on this topic indefinitely, but I'll look and see if there's anything I really wanted to cover.
Okay, so here's from Fred Harper. Your Happiness One OCON talk has improved my life in a profound way. I wanted to thank you for your hard work. How to differentiate between disvalue and anti-values? What would you call anything one acts to avoid or lose? Okay,
great. So I'm really delighted that talk was was so helpful. I'm really, really delighted about that.
Yep.
So I haven't really talked about what an anti-value is. So I would distinguish, let me tell you what I think an anti-value is. I think an anti-value is an actual structure in your memory banks. So if you think in terms of, you have a lot of concepts stored that are organized in various ways, and you have a lot of concretes in there, and you have a lot of memories in there, the connections, there are connections between the concepts, which is your knowledge. There are connections between the values, which is your value hierarchy. And those connections are greatly affected by your actions, right? Values get integrated by action. If you do something as a means to achieving a goal, those two things get connected in memory. If you have a central purpose, a lot of your actions get connected to a central purpose. So you get kind of an organization there. And normally the big organization is around logical connections of concepts and values that you have. There can be, if you have something that you treat as an out of context absolute you must avoid, then you can get the opposite, which is an area where there are no connections, where, because you avoid it, You avoid everything near it. And you see this with people, they're like a phobia expands. Or if there's something like a person is afraid of going on a plane, and then they get afraid of going out of the house, and then they get afraid of talking to people, right? If unchecked, this kind of damage expands, and you get, in effect, areas where you have taken no action, you've avoided, so you've never put yourself in that situation, which means you've never learned anything about how to handle that situation. You have no skill. And you have very little knowledge about it, because whenever it gets mentioned, you get afraid, I got to get away from that. And this is what I would call an anti-value. And think of it as like a black hole in your memory banks that really repels. It's so awful to get there, because let's face it, if you have no knowledge, no skill, and no values, you're going to feel tremendous self-doubt if you get close to that. So this is self-reinforcing. If you just act on self-doubt to just avoid feeling self-doubt, you will create anti-values. But this is unusual. This is not, if you take a normal person who's supporting themselves. I mean, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so that's the kind of person I deal with. I deal with a person who, has a life, right? Okay. Has whatever. But you can have one of these, and it does distort your behavior, and it does distort your emotions. The good news is, how do you get rid of that? You start actually facing that fear and getting a little knowledge about it and getting a little bit of skill at dealing with it. And, you need to do that in a way that you don't panic and run away, but it's not so hard. Getting even just a little bit of knowledge can really make the difference in how that motivates you. So that, I would say, an anti-value is an actual structure. Now, in contrast, I think a disvalue is not, it's just not that big. It's like mud, right? Okay, you look at mud and you don't really care if there's mud out there in the lawn unless you're going to step there. And then it's situational. It's like, oh yeah, my feet are going to get wet. I should put on some boots. And so you see that something bad is going to happen, and so you have some aversion. It's to the mud because the mud is going to be the causal agent, but it's situational. You aren't anti-mud, right? Or, the mud gets tracked on the floor. Oh, I'm going to need to clean it up again. Okay, well, it's not the end of the world, right? You're not like, oh my God, we can't have any mud. If you do, you've got a phobia, and it's an irrational, out of context fear. So I would say that a disvalue is just a situational figuring out that this is not good in this context. It's not where you basically treat it like metaphysical. You're just saying, oh yeah, no.
So what would you use something that is objectively a threat to your life?
What is the question? What is objectively a threat to your life? Or?
So if something is objectively a threat to your life, that's a disvalue?
Well, I would call it a threat. And yes, I mean, so a disvalue per se is something that you want to avoid. Yeah. But a threat, it depends what the threat is. You got to look at it, right? Yeah. And and you need to figure out what to do about that threat. And sometimes you decide I should avoid it. Sometimes you decide I need to get rid of this. Like, I mean, termites in the house. It's not a threat to your life. I need but there it's also situational.
If you're in Israel, right? Hamas is a threat to your life if you're in Israel, to use a previous example we used.
Right. Right. But even like if someone comes into your house with a gun, you may decide the best thing to do is to run away.
Oh, yeah.
And the most important thing is that you don't panic. So you can actually make a decision about what do you think is the best thing for you to do in that moment.
Yep.
Right. So the important thing is, again, that yes, this is a threat and this is a disvalue, whatever. Obviously, it's a real emergency situation. There isn't time to stop and think. That's what defines an emergency, basically. Well, that's not quite right. But if you can't stop to think, you can't stop to think. You're just going to have to go with whatever is the best of your past value organization gives you. But if you have a moment to think, I mean, this is something Harry and I talked about. If someone broke into our house, there is a door to the outside world from the bedroom, and the plan is we have sneakers next to the bed. The plan is to leave by the bedroom door. That is the plan. Right?
That's good.
Right. So it's not, so you see here that even a threat to your life is something that you can look at coolly and say, what am I going to do?
Yep.
It's a fact out there, and it can be a fact that it is a threat to your life. But if your emotional reaction is, oh no, it's a disaster, that's a problem. You need to introspect that. What is the whole situation? What are my values? Okay, I definitely need to act in this situation. What are my options? Let me do it. And that comes from having some emotional resilience, so you can actually say, oh, I just had emotion. You can't think if you're emotionally overloaded.
Yep.
And in that situation, you need to think, and you need to actually have the skill to come back down, put your brain in gear, and decide what to do, because action is very important.
Yep. So just to remind everybody, you can ask Jean questions. The super chat feature on YouTube allows for that. So jump in. There's a little $sign at the bottom of the chat there. You can press on that. And $2, $10, $20, $500. I don't think you can do more than $500, but that way you support the show and you ask a question. It's a great win-win trade. And I just did want to thank Allison for the sticker, because you can also do a sticker and just support the show without asking a question. And Wes, thank you, Wes, $50. Really appreciate that. Mary Aline and John, thank you guys for the stickers. Okay, Jennifer asks, there's a popular saying, quote, you should be happy no matter what happens. Happiness is inside, etc. So I should be happy if I lose my job, my friend dies, my dog gets run over, so on. I always thought that doesn't make any sense.
Okay. So I would not use the locution, you should be happy. I mean, that's like criticizing you for your emotional state, right? Yeah. And I don't think you should ever criticize yourself for your emotional state. Your emotional state is really telling you something about your values and your current situation based on your past understanding of things. Now, can you be happy even if you lost your job and someone died? I think actually it takes work to be happy. And the work is the kind of work that I was talking about there, which is, yes, it's bad if you lose your job temporarily, you don't have as much money, or maybe you really, we'd have to look at the particular job and why are you unhappy you lost that job, right? Because you need to know the particular values you got from that, so you can go and find another way, find someone who does want to cooperate with you to pay you money to do that kind of thing, right? It's good you had the job, you have proof of concept, someone wants to pay you for that. So it's this kind of thing that you need to do. And this is the kind of work. Accepting reality, I think, is the critical thing you need to be able to maintain at least serenity. You can't, if you say, oh, I lost my job, I shouldn't have lost my job, it's terrible that I lost my job, you're fighting reality. Mm-hmm. You did lose your job. And you need to really accept the unpleasant emotions associated with that, because there could be guilt, there could be frustration, there could be a whole lot of sadness, there could be anger, there could be despair, there could be a lot of negative emotions around that. And if you just want to just say, it shouldn't have happened, it shouldn't have happened, it shouldn't have happened, you never actually process those emotions. You never get clear on all the values that are that you now don't have access to. You were getting a bunch of values by that job, and mm-hmm. you don't get clear on what they are. And if you don't get clear on what they are, you can't go after them now. And this is often the case that, people get so hung up on trying to blame. Blame is blaming other people or blaming the world or whatever is completely counterproductive, entirely threat-oriented, and sends you into misery and unhappiness. And that is, so I would say you should never do that. It's not that other people don't do things wrong. It's that you don't blame your life on what other people do. You take active, oh, if these people behave that way, then if I have this value, I need to find another way to get it. I need to find a different kind of person to cooperate with. Now I know something about how to make sure I don't get that in situation again, right? So you need to fight for your happiness in the same way that you fight for your life. If bad things happen, you need to fight for your happiness. And the first way you do that is stop fighting reality. And the next way you do that is really understanding your values all the way down. And the next thing you do after that is start finding small ways that you can gain values. And it's very quick. As soon as you stop fighting reality, you get to a state of serenity, which is compatible with happiness. And as soon as you get to a state of serenity, you can find small things to do. And you're not going to be deliriously happy at first, but you can be anywhere on the positive side. You can be content at least, and then build it up to stronger and stronger joy.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the question. Let's see. Stringer Bell asks, hello, Gene. How does one get past beating themselves up over their past experiences?
Yes. So, yes, right. Yes. So, I mean, I do think one of the things you need to do is, there are two things. One is, I think the way to deal with any kind of stuff like this is to have a goal that you want to go after now. And it needs to be at least, I mean, it could be relatively short term. It could be, a month or 2 month goal. It's great if you have a central purpose, but a positive goal is the way to change all of these patterns. So if you are beating yourself up for what you did in the past, and there's something you want to do, the reason you're beating yourself up is because you think it's going to stop you from getting what you want. And it is going to get in the way of getting what you want until you stop beating yourself up. Because if you spend the time beating yourself up, you never actually act to get any of those values. And you find that out and you see that for yourself in a first-handed way by trying to go after a goal. This is one of the things I do in my launch program, right? Is people beat themselves up every week. They beat themselves up because they didn't do the work this week that they said they were going to do. And we process that, and they figure out they learn something from not having done it. They learn that the beating yourself up is actually just kind of a self-indulgent, it's like the monks who would lash themselves, right? At least you can stop feeling guilty. It's like you assuage the guilt by punishing yourself. Well, that's just destroying you, right? This is where morality can help. The goal is to live a great life. And from here, where you are now, you can live a great life. And it doesn't matter what mistakes you made in the past. So that's one part of it. The other thing I would say is this point that I made about how even if you made really big mistakes, you almost certainly developed some important values and learned some things you wouldn't have learned. And this is part of what makes you uniquely you. And I'll just give a personal example of this. I went into engineering, I was in engineering. I left engineering after, well, it depends how you count it, but I was at my first job for 6 years. I got a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering from MIT. And I was, kind of a hot shot. But I went into engineering because that's what literally everybody in my immediate family has an engineering degree. My father, my mother, my brother, and my sister, we all have engineering degrees. I was good at math and science. I didn't really, well, I guess that's what I should do.
Yeah.
Right. And I wasn't actually very interested in engineering. And even though I worked on a fantastic project, we did the first field experiments in laser guide star adaptive optics, which is taking the twinkle out of stars. And it was wildly exciting. It was like it had never been done before. I was wildly excited. And then after the first proof of concept, we needed to do the second one. I didn't find that nearly as interesting. I'm like, why are we doing, this isn't fun. This is just technology, right?
Yeah.
And that was part of my clue that maybe I wasn't in the right field. But I went off in the wrong direction. And I then, it's Ayn Rand who interested me in psychology. But everything I learned as an engineer is absolutely relevant to what I do now. Even though it was totally mistaken, it was totally secondhand, it was, there were a lot of things that were wrong with what I did. My people skills were terrible. They were terrible.
Mhm.
And yet all of that has informed who I am. It's informed why I'm actually good at teaching the things I teach, both the expertise in math and science, because I think there was an area that I thought very clearly, and the fact that I was terrible at the social stuff. And so I needed to learn it. So I'm actually much better at teaching it than other people would be, because they didn't have to do this. So one of the things you need to understand is, even if you totally screwed up in the past, you learned something. And that is going to, and when you really learn to honor what you learned, even through your mistakes, then that really heals it. And you say, yeah, it's all right. It's totally okay that I made those mistakes, because they brought me here. I'm glad to be here.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Stringer Bell. Let's see, Silvanos. Hi, Yaron. Hello, Jean. Looking forward to using this to work on myself. I struggle with apathy and avoiding emotions with distractions. Thank you. So any advice to Silvanos on applying this to deal with apathy?
Yes. So avoiding emotions is the root problem here. And it's something, emotions, being afraid of feeling stuff is a problem, because emotions are the alerts that some value of yours is at stake. And if you avoid emotions, you basically wind up not getting the alerts. You become less aware of things that you could do that would be good for you. And the reason you avoid it is usually because the emotions you think are going to be negative. They're going to be unpleasant. So what I generally recommend in this case is you need to develop a little bit of emotional resilience. And the first way to do that is that 3 good things exercise. If you start doing that every day, you're going to start feeling some emotions. And you may actually, when you go to do the 3 good things, you may initially feel really bad because, no, this was a terrible day. And then you need to keep going and look and say, yeah, it was terrible, but let me look at those emotions and figure out what was good. Because there always is a way to find something good that happened, even if it was a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
So getting in touch with your emotions, there's really no alternative. And that is how you identify the values. And you can't purposefully strengthen your values, which is what gives passion, right? I think a central purpose is how you really build passion. You need a long range goal that you really care about. That is something you can build up over time. But unless you know the value and you are consciously acting to gain and keep it, and experiencing the joy and the pride and the confidence associated with that, you cannot develop passion. So one thing is stop avoiding your emotions. The other is set even a mild goal and start trying to work toward that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thanks, Silvanos. Okay, Daniel. Any advice for restoring your emotional response for emotionally flatlined people? Very similar to Silvanos, right?
Yeah, it's basically the same issue. And, the other thing I would say, as I said, I'm not a clinical therapist. I'm not a clinical psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And, if someone is really depressed, they should see a therapist. It's very important. If you really think there's any chance you might be clinically depressed, you should see a therapist. And they can help you with this, because it is easier. The thing that a therapist does, there are 2 things I think are absolutely critical for a therapist. One is they understand emotions and they can help you understand. They can be like with you, get to understand you well, and be able to help you handle those emotions, because you can be in a safe state with them and they can give you empathy. And that is actually very important. The other thing that they do is they help you develop a relationship with someone. Like it is really, a lot of times the reason people get depressed is because they're socially isolated. And I think having a person that you talk to about, really personal stuff helps you learn how you can actually relate to other people. And that is something, I don't know that you can do that without one-on-one. I don't know that you can do that. So there's a lot you can do by yourself. And I kind of view all of my tactics for anyone who's in therapy. I kind of view all this advice as support for therapy. And, if you do this kind of work in between therapy sessions, you advance really fast. But it is all self-study type stuff. But that doesn't mean therapy isn't a value. Therapy is definitely a value.
Lone Dissenter asks, to me, motivation by love equals active orientation. To get wealth, love, and charity, and clarity, don't merely avoid losses, cycles and error, pursue profit, go on dates, get new knowledge. Ayn tripped Frank in order to meet him, and pined away versus pining away hoping.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's the value orientation is going to then motivate you to take action. And if you are not taking action, what you need to do is get clearer on your values, because then you're going to experience some desire. You do need emotions to take action. You need desire to actually take action. You need that impulse that comes with the emotion. Or aversion. Like sometimes it's proper to use aversion. Like, gee, if I don't start doing this, I don't know when I'm going to get this big thing I want. I better get started.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's fine to do that, but that's you get from understanding your values. And I think this is a good example of some people who are very action oriented are completely unself-conscious of this, and just their values are not that, they're not that self-aware, and it just works in certain areas for them. But if it doesn't work in another area, then they need to be more self-aware. And it always breaks down, there's, I never remember the names of these rules, but the idea of getting promoted to your point of incompetence.
Yeah.
I forget which one that is. Anyway, that's a person who is unself-consciously just going after things. If they don't have the skill to then consciously develop the knowledge, values, and skills to go to the next level, because there'll always be something that you're not prepared for. Like if you go like engineering, if you go from being an engineer to being a manager, you suddenly need people skills. And if you don't, and typically engineers don't have them, right? I mean, it's a stereotype, but it has some validity. I can say, trained as an engineer. If you don't proactively go and learn those, you will fail. And that takes a certain self-awareness and a willingness to, be vulnerable and other things.
So Harry's asking, can you concretize reframing avoidance of a negative as pursuing a positive?
Yes. So, I mean, we talked about a couple of those, but let's, so we need an avoidance of a negative. We need a concrete example of avoiding a negative. Well, that was the example I actually just gave. Hold on. No, it's not the example I just gave. Right. So let's just say, oh, I'm feeling tired. I don't want to do this work because I'm going to be tireder. And I don't want to do that. Right. So this would be an example of you're not doing the thing that you said you were going to do because you think you're going to be tired. Actually, let's make it a little more juicy. Let's give a reason for resistance. What would be a reason you wouldn't want to do something, why you would resist doing something? Let's see. Let me just make up an example.
Yep.
Suppose you are supposed to get a report to your boss on Monday, and well, actually today's Monday, so on Wednesday, and you don't want to work on it, and you're procrastinating on it. You don't want to do it, right? Okay, you need to now find out, why don't you want to do it? What is the threat? Well, let's make one. I mean, there could be different things, right? Let's name 3. 1, turns out you don't know what to put in the report. 2, you think no matter what you put in the report, the manager is going to think it's terrible. Let's see, come up with a third one. You got an idea for a third reason why you might not want to do it?
You're going to have to miss out on hearing Gene on the Yaron Brook show.
Yeah, right. Okay, there is something else you want to do. That's a great, right. There's something that would be more pleasant to do. Like you'd rather play Tetris or listen to your own. Let's say listen to your own. Okay, so let's look at each one of these, because I think it entirely depends on why are you having the avoidance motivation. And how you're going to reorient depends entirely on what it is. So let's take the first one. You think you don't know what to put in the report. And so you're scared. And the reaction is and that's unpleasant. And so you're kind of going away. Well, when you really face that fear, you get actually more scared. Oh my God, I really don't know what goes in this report. There's a real issue here, which is I want this job. I actually do want to, let's stipulate that you're in a job you actually care about. I really do need to get clearer on this. And there's knowledge that I want to gain. So you might reorient in that case, you might reorient that you really need understanding. And so you would, go to the boss and get some clarity or do some research or whatever it was. By being clear that the reason you were running away because you were afraid you couldn't do it, you would actually get clearer on what you need, and you would start getting motivated to get the things that you need in order to do it, assuming that it was actually a value to do it. Now, let's take the second one where no matter what you put in, the manager is going to disapprove. And let's stipulate that you're right about that, right? That could be false, right?
Probably.
But then you've got to ask, assuming that you are in this job and that there is that you, and it's a company that you actually think is worth working for. I mean, if I thought that, I would quit, right? Why don't you just quit? If this manager is so irrational, why are you working there, right? But if you want to actually cooperate with him, then you could actually say, manager, you could actually want to actually find out what is the value of doing this, or what is it he would actually want, or what would actually satisfy them. And this again would then motivate you to actually do some work to try to figure out what would make this a good use of your time, because the manager doesn't want you to waste your time, right? He doesn't succeed if you waste your time. So the point of doing this is, I don't feel like I've explained this in a way that makes it be completely transparent. So let me just try to name what the process is. You look at the concrete thing that you are avoiding. You look at the reason for why you're avoiding it. You look and see, does that reason make any sense? And if it makes sense, you immediately have some values you want to act to gain and or keep, because you actually are clearer now on what a problem is, and you can go into problem solving mode.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's take and I think both of those cases, we made it that you got clearer on what the problem was, and now you can try to do problem solving, assuming you actually wanted to get the thing. Now, suppose you actually don't want to be at this job. You don't want to do it. You're just, you think it's worthless. So I actually had this at a job I had, and I refused to do the job because I thought it was irrational. And I gave my reasons, and there was some kerfuffle about that, but in that case, I was fighting for my values. I did not think that we should waste our time. I did not think we should waste the company's time. I did my best to persuade people that this should be done differently. And as a result, I was satisfied with my, I did not do the job. I literally did not do the job, but I was fighting for my values. And so, I've got a reputation.
And if the conclusion is you hate the company and you hate the boss, then the positive is, okay, well, I need to leave and find something better. Right?
Yes, right. So and in that case, it's a matter of integrity, right? Mm-hmm. That you do not want to be, you want to actually create values. You don't want to be part of something that is not creating values. And that's actually what I did in that particular situation. I found a job that I could do. So that would be an example. And you don't know what the value is until you do those steps, right? Let's take the third case, which is what you really want to do is be watching the Yaron Brook show. So now here's a case where you may actually conclude, I really made a commitment. I want to watch the Yaron Brook show. I can see why I want to watch it. It would be a lot easier, it'd be a lot more pleasant. I'm very concerned about the world situation here. I really want to understand that. I've just found out about Ayn Rand, and he's explaining it all to me. I really want to hear Yaron, right? So we can all get behind that. And then you got to say, okay, where is that? And where do I think logically that is in my value hierarchy? And if you actually think the job is important, you could say, wow, I really need to actually budget my time for, pursuing the subjectivism. And I've got actually a kind of mismatch in my motivation right now, that I'm not excited about the work and I am excited about that. What am I going to do about that? That is an objective problem, because if you aren't getting pleasure, if you aren't getting pride and joy and confidence from your daily work, you are going to be miserable. And of course, you're going to want to go watch podcasts and things. And that actually is alerting you to, gee, I need to make my job more rewarding. And that this is a real issue, right? And this now becomes an issue of selfishness. I need my job that supports me and that I spend most of my time on to be something that is selfishly rewarding to me. Yaron taught me that, right? I mean, you talk about stuff like that, right?
Yep.
And this could be an example of how even doing this would actually integrate. You say, okay, I'm going to try to do my job, figuring out how to be more selfish about it as I go. What would Yaron do here in this situation? You see, I'm just making something up.
Sure.
But I'm trying to follow how that might go. And the point is, it helps you look at the facts. It helps you look at your values. It helps you look at this whole value landscape, because you do have multiple values and you can't pursue them all at the same time. And this is why you make logical decisions about what is more important at a given time. And here's something that I think is very important. The fact that you feel a bigger pull for your own versus doing the report is entirely because the importance of your own is right now higher than the report. But how do you make something be emotionally more important? You pay more attention to it. There's Ayn Rand quotes a dictionary definition of importance. Importance means entitled to attention or consideration. This is a value judgment you make. You can decide that work is more important, and then you can put your attention on work. Remember, directing attention is like one of the things you can do volitionally. So you say, look, I need to get into this report. Can I warm up this context? And sure enough, if you spend a half an hour warming up the context of the report, you won't be thinking about your own. You will get into it. It will start to become interesting again. You can get on with your work.
So Harry says, what I had in mind is a case where reframing immediately changes your whole mental set. He says he experienced it.
That does happen. So let me, so we're going to take an example here. So I'm feeling self-doubt because I don't have an example right now. Right.
There you go.
And so let me see if I can do that. Right. So I'm wanting to be clear. I really want to be clear. And now I feel more relaxed, actually. And so he needs an example. So we can probably let's pick dinner, right? Let's pick an example from dinner, a really homey example. You know what? Let me try to name it abstractly, because
example is jumping into the cold pool.
Okay, well, we can do that. That's his example. I recognize this hairy fellow.
You recognize this hairy guy?
Yeah. So, so I'm just going to give his example, okay?
Okay.
So he doesn't want to jump into the cold pool, and then he remembers he's doing it because it's supposed to really stimulate your immune system and increase longevity. And he wants longevity.
Yeah.
He says, I want longevity. Okay, let's go in.
And he just does it. Yeah.
Right.
So he's reoriented away from the cold and towards the positive value with it, which is the longevity.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is something, this can happen if you just make sure that the choices on both sides are named in terms of values instead of one in threats and one in values. Often it's really clear what the biggest value is, and that can instantly change things. But it doesn't work if you have one threat and one value. You will feel conflict. You need to turn them both. When it's value, it's actually pretty easy to tell which is which. This is another Ayn Rand thing, right? Ayn Rand has in the article on Rawls, on Rawls' theory of justice.
Yeah.
She talks about, he says, we're going to use the maxi-min theory. We're going to try to maximize the minimum happiness of everybody. And she says, no, I want maxi-max. I want to max. I'm going to take the choice that leads to the best possible chance of happiness. And that is the value orientation. That is, well, if I do this, so there's one of my people I've learned from is a woman named Brook, and she always recommends if you have, like, you're not sure whether you should start your business now or keep working until you build up more. She says, well, if the best possible result happened with each one, which one would be better?
Yep.
And pick that one. And don't get all caught up in trying to trade off all of the little possibilities. Keep an idea on the big picture. Which one has the biggest possible payoff? And that can be, that's a very inspiring way to make a decision. And it motivates you immediately. And it does it by just, in effect, putting the values in perspective and seeing, hey, something that I really want, I could get, this is a path to something that would be the best. And now you'll fight for it. Now you have the motivation to fight for it.
Great. All right. Mary Eileen says, Toastmasters is becoming increasingly woke.
Oh,
Things
no.
like servant leaders and giving back. I find the new education program to be infantilizing.
Ugh.
On the other hand, there are many people I love, thoughts, advice on coping.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I was in Toastmasters for 20 years. And Ralph Smedley, the guy who started Toastmasters, is a real hero. I mean, I've read his biography. He's a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
Right. So let me try to understand what the question is. Is the question, I don't know if her question is, what should I do, or how do I deal with this?
I think it's, how do I deal with this? Advice on coping.
Advice on coping. Well, so the first thing you need to do is the moral issue. Can you still sanction this? Do you think that this organization is still, and I assume yes, because the basic mission of Toastmasters is to help people become better speakers, and it's a rational goal. But it sounds like the means are not good. So now the thing I would say is most of this stuff can probably be reanalyzed in terms of rational values. So for example, servant leadership. This is some of my ideas in cooperation I got by reading a book that was on servant leadership. The idea of servant leadership is you need to actually know what the values are of the person you're in charge of, and that you give them tasks that in fact meet their values. And you basically feed forward. So you actually do a lot of the work to make sure that they are pursuing a rational value. Now, obviously, both people should be caring about, is it selfish for both people? A trade involves, it's selfish for both people. But it is true in our altruistic society that a lot of people don't even know how to be selfish, and they don't know that that's the issue. So talking about servant leadership, this would actually perhaps give you a way to draw out the person's values and talk with them about how do they selfishly get their values and how they do that in a way that is compatible with your selfish values. So you might be able to use this as a vehicle to teach selfishness, even though the conceptual framework is wrong. Because it is a distorted attempt to explain a real issue in communication. Now, what was the other one she said? Because she gave another example of something that was messed up. Oh, infantile.
Giving back, and then infantilizing.
Right. So the giving back, I would just, there would be an example where I would disagree every time it was discussed. And I would say, this has got to be selfish. You should not. And every time I would use this as a chance to be on a campaign for rational selfishness and say, I'm here not because I'm giving back. I'm here because I enjoy seeing people grow. And if you guys stop growing, I'm out of here. I don't owe you anything. I mean, I'm saying that in a really
Yeah, no, that's good.
antagonistic way. And then the infantilizing of the program, you know what I would do? I would talk up the old program. And I mean, I assume they're still doing 5 to 7 minute speeches. And if they aren't, then there's something wrong. But I would in every evaluation, I would bug people and say, hey, in the old days, we used to fight for this, this, and this. I think you should fight. I don't think you need to do this baby stuff.
Yep.
I would fight for your values. So I would treat this. You have, I know Mary-Aline has been in, I know Mary-Aline. She's been in Toastmasters, I think, way more than 20 years, I think. And so she knows the old program. She knows the skills. And, fighting for your values, those who fight for the future live in it today is really true. So that's what I would do. And I would actually fight within Toastmasters to bring back Ralph Smedley's a program. That the original 10 speech program was amazing. It was absolutely graded from easy to hard. And every one of the speeches was worth doing. So
She says she's been 22 years.
I knew it.
So Danielle asks, any words of wisdom for someone after a crushing breakup?
Oh, well, Ellen Kenner is the person to help you with that. She's the expert on romantic love. One of the things you really need to give yourself some loving attention and give yourself some space and do the mourning. This is not the time to shut down your emotions. If you don't have a journal, I would start a journal and really think about all the things you loved and just make sure that, you can start. What I would do is I would start the journaling with whatever is top of mind, but then use your logical mind to, write a page of complaining or distress or despair or whatever it is, but then go back and really think about, what does this mean about what I care about, and turn it into an exercise in understanding your own values, because that will make the journal. You don't want to have it be that you just go into journaling and you just spend 3 hours moping and you get depressed. You want to put in, whatever, 5 or 10 minutes on that, and then take that opportunity to try to understand, what does this mean about what's important to me? Why is it important? Why do I care about that? Where else do I have that in my life? And I'm sure that, this will help, so that you need to process the emotions, and this will help make it be a little more tolerable to process them.
Yes.
That's what I would suggest. I'm sorry about the breakup.
Yep. So Andrew says, Harry tells the story of Rand's asking what attracted him to the philosophy. He said he could clearly see that other ideas were BS. She was disappointed, asked, what about the truth? Good crystallization of motivation by values. Like she
I don't know this story. If we're talking about my Harry, I don't know this story.
Harry.
My Harry is Harry Binswanger. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm married to Binswanger.
He said, supposedly, right, that he said, well, he could see clearly that everything else was BS. And she said, yeah, but what about the truth? That's the positive. Right. It's the motivation.
Yes. Values. Right. I mean, I totally agree that the truth is the positive.
Yes.
Is the value. Right.
And Harry says, yes, that is what happened.
You never told me that.
He confirms it on the chat. So he confirms it on the chat. She asked, what about caring about truth and your life? That was the full thing.
Right. Yes. Right. Well, I mean, she was pretty motivated by values, wasn't she?
No question. No question. Yeah. The W.R. Brown, he says, have you integrated, I assume it's a he, I have no idea. Have you integrated this theory with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I've always considered the core of love being based on the need for self-esteem, therefore motivation by love essentially being motivation by self-esteem.
Well, so Sort of, let's see. So sorry if I give you a kind of long answer to this.
Longish.
Longish. Okay. So
It's getting late.
if people don't know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is the idea that until you have like safety and security, you can't even think about like having relationships. And until you have good relationships, you can't, the highest in the hierarchy of needs is self-actualization is what he has. And so I don't agree with Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
I don't actually think that safety is a deep rational value. Now, that's a controversial view, but I think that that's essentially motivated by fear. So I don't think that that's actually a value. And sometimes needs are really avoidance of threats, not values. Now, self-actualization, what is that? I think that's really something like a productive purpose is what self-actualization is this big floaty concept. So I don't actually agree with his hierarchy of needs. Now, that said, he was a big influence on Marshall Rosenberg, who is a big influence on me. And he has what he calls universal needs, which includes Maslow's relatively short list, plus another much longer list, which is where I got the idea of deep rational values. And I basically cleaned up their lists. I think it's very important to have, to understand, have a long list of rational values, well, like 50, to be able to easily, abstractly conceptualize your values. And I think that's something that Marshall Rosenberg figured out. So there is an influence, there's an indirect influence of Maslow on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very integrated with Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, even though that is totally the wrong concept for it. And universal needs is the wrong concept. They're not universal, and needs are not the fundamental. Values are the fundamental.
Yep.
So sort of the answer is yes. But the real thing I want to talk about is the issue of self-esteem. Because, of course, this is what Brandon emphasized in taking objectivism and applying it to psychology, focused on self-esteem. And I have always found his discussions of self-esteem problematic without in any way, I mean, if you think of self-esteem as reliance on one's ability to think, I totally agree that you need to rely on your ability to think. And that if you do rely on your ability to think, you look like you have self-esteem, right? You run into any problem, you say, well, what am I going to do about this? And if you do that, you look like a person with self-esteem. But people often think of it as like this personality characteristic that you have it or you don't. Whereas my view is that people who are, mixed to good, right? That they've got some pretty big proportion of good in their lives, have values, do value themselves, but don't know how to do it consistently.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have an anti-value, which totally screws you up in a couple areas, like you're absolutely averse to conflict, which is going to totally screw up your relationships and all kinds of things. What you need to be able to do is you need to be able to draw on self-esteem. You need to activate that context of, hey, I can rely on my ability to think. And that involves being able to calm down when you're overloaded or overwhelmed or in conflict. Focus on the situation, look at the situation, say, what am I going to do here? And actually think. And that's a learnable skill. So I don't view self-esteem as a static thing. I view it as something where it's a context you need to activate. And that's actually probably the biggest integration between my view of psychology and Ayn Rand's epistemology. I see most of the work you need to do in psychology as activating a context where you recognize your strengths and you can figure things out. Activate a context where your values and you see what's important to you. And that's, the number one law of logic is hold the full context. Well, you need to hold the full value context. And that's what the value orientation helps you do.
Good. Okay, James. Gene, speak on relationships navigating alignment in values versus alignment in execution towards those values. Can long-term compatibility exist with drastically different methods of achieving them if both people are okay?
Yes. Right. So this is actually the person who's the expert on this is Marshall Rosenberg, because he calls them need versus strategy. But that's what you're talking about. That if you both want, say, a harmonious relationship, right? That's maybe not a great example. Suppose you both want a husband and wife, and you both want a certain standard of living, right? That's still a little too concrete. I gotta get a concrete here to get a hold of this here. Because we're kind of floating, right?
Alignment in values, alignment in execution towards those values.
Right. So
You might share a value of
having kids, maybe,
yeah.
or how they raise the kids.
How to raising the kids well,
Right.
right?
So
And
they
then the
both,
question, how do you do it?
right. They both want the kids to be independent, but they have different views about how you foster independence.
Yep.
And right. So here, I do think that there are two things you need. One is you do actually need to get it abstract enough and rational enough that you see that you're in alignment. And that is sometimes important, because people say, well, I want the kid to behave. Well, I want the kid to be free. Well, you haven't gotten fundamental enough. What is it you want? You want the child to actually be a rational, independent member, functioning member of society, for which they need to have a certain amount of I would call it self-direction. And they need to actually know their own values, right? If you go deep enough till you get to the thing that really does unite you, then you can start to see ways like, okay, that's the goal. Then you can make a case for why there should be some freedom and some structure, and that you can actually talk about it. Now, as far as actually getting total agreement, I think it's also very important in any relationship that you do not feel that you have to be locked at the hip. You don't have to have the same emotional reactions. You don't have to agree. You don't have to agree on the execution, right? But you do need to agree to disagree. And so, for example, you can, assuming that you don't think what the person is doing is actually harming the child, you could say, okay, I'm willing to let you're going to, teach the child this way. I'm going to teach them this way. They aren't the same. Child is going to have to figure that out. Good for child. Child will learn that the adults aren't omniscient, and that they can disagree. And good for child. Child may be a little confused, but so what, right? You can actually agree to disagree. And if the idea that there are no conflicts of interest among rational men, I think is very important here. And I think if you have not reached an agreement, it means that there is uncertainty and that it's not known, for example, exactly how to raise a child so to best set an environment where they can learn to be independent. And I don't have kids, but you have kids your own.
I do.
My understanding is it really is, you have to keep thinking about these kids, and that two different kids are different and they need different things. And it's a continuous problem-solving process. And so it's like any joint problem-solving process. You're going to need to have some alignment on the goal, and then you're going to need to not feel that you have to have total agreement. And just, probably what you need to do is you need to set ground rules about respect between you. Like the two parents may not treat the kids the same way, but they won't undercut each other. Something like that. I'm kind of making this up as I go, but I absolutely think this is possible.
Yep.
And the thing that makes it possible is both, it is not wanting to control the other person, and recognizing that neither of you are omniscient, and that both of you need to act on your own judgment. So
Right. Ian asks, I experienced a failure in work and feel like I cannot get back to a win-win relationship with my boss. I feel that I'm having to pay back for my failure without a clear way to get back to achieving my values. Any advice?
Okay. So, I mean, I would really think about this, right? So really understand the failure and how do you take ownership of that? And I would talk to the boss about it, right? It's no good if you feel like you're never going to get trusted by your boss. This is not a healthy relationship at work. And and I think the more that you can be upfront about it, and the first you need to get really clear on why you think you made a mistake, what your contribution was, what you're going to change. The thing that impresses people is people learning from their own mistakes. There's no person on earth who is not, or no manager on earth who is not, no, you know what? Let me just get rid of I don't know if this is true.
Yeah.
There's no rational person on earth who doesn't notice when someone actually learns from their mistakes, when someone actually is self-aware and cares about it and actually takes ownership of whatever their mistakes are, and then proactively tries to do something about it. Any rational person recognizes that and sees this is good. I mean, this is the way that you tell whether a person is good. You don't tell by their current action. You tell by their whether they're getting better or getting worse. And this is one of the ways you tell they're getting better, and you tell that they actually are on the right premise. Now, so that's the thing you need to do. Now, I don't know if your boss is rational or not, but if he is rational, if you know that if you're doing this and you're doing this well and you genuinely want to try to sort this out, you are then in a position of strength to then talk to your boss about it and tell him, look, I'm doing this, I'm trying to do this. I really think this is important. I'm upset about that, but I've come to terms with how that happened. I think I understand how it happened. I don't feel like we've actually got the trust, and I think I would be more effective now if you saw that I'm taking ownership of it. What do you think we can do? Right? You can have that open, honest, equal conversation when you know you're taking charge of yourself. And of course, part of this is also one of the other ways you can have that conversation is that you're okay if it doesn't go well. Like suppose the boss says, no, you're never going to get my trust again. Okay, well, you now have learned something important, and you're in a good position to then transfer somewhere else or go somewhere where you can be more helpful. You might even get his help to get you moved to another position where you could actually establish a better trust. So social values are rational too. And I think that's part of the problem. Part of the problem that we have in the culture is that all the social stuff is explained in terms of altruism instead of rational values of cooperation, connection, and communication. The truth is, if there is a trade, there are rational values.
All right. Raphael says, Harry's first encounter with Ayn Rand's getting a lot of attention. When Harry first met Ayn Rand at MIT during the Q&A, she responded, "We're very chaste regarding sex."
That wasn't his question. That was someone else's question.
Yeah,
that
somebody
was
else's
the story I
question.
have heard. Yes.
But he's told the story. I think
Yes,
Harry's
he told the story. Yes. Yeah.
What did she mean by this? And what is the objectivist view, particularly for those who are single?
Well, I don't claim to know everything about Ayn Rand's view of sex, but I would say that the idea of chaste is, I think monogamy is very important. You know, sex is a very intimate experience, and you don't want to have that casually. You want to have it with someone who you have a degree of trust. And I mean, for a woman, trust is extremely important. You know, I'm not a guy, so I can't introspect exactly what it is for a guy, but I would assume, you know, you can be hurt tremendously. I mean, you can be physically hurt if you're a woman, and you can be wounded psychologically in either case. So you really need a relationship to be having sex. And, there is I always get embarrassed when I talk about sex, but there is an alternative, right? Masturbation isn't an alternative. You don't have to have a sexual partner, so you can hold out for that. And the reason is it's such a celebration of life. You want someone who you can actually have that celebration with.
Mhm.
And so I think it's okay to be a serial monogamist. I don't think you have to have one. You don't necessarily find the person that you want to be with for the rest of your life. But it doesn't make sense to just, that's what I understand as the issue. I'm curious what you think, Yaron.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, she's clearly advocating, I mean, you see that Atlas Shrugged, right, for serial monogamy. I mean, so she doesn't mean chaste in the sense of you have to find that one perfect person,
right,
and only do it after marriage. I mean, that is, I mean, throughout her novel, she's obviously negating that. But she very much associates who you're attracted to and with saying something meaningful about who you are, and that you should pursue sex as part of a loving relationship with someone. That doesn't mean, again, it's the final relationship, it's the one and only relationship, but in that, so, as how he puts it in, how he says in the chat, it's anti-promiscuities, right? So
right,
as a negative, but the positive is, as a single guy, you want to go out with women. You want to find women that you have, share values with, that you want to have some kind of positive relationship with, and sex should be part of that. That is what we're very
yeah,
pro-sex, right?
yes,
And yet we're not pro-sex as just go have sex with anybody, because that kind of negates the whole point of sex.
right. It's too special, right?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
special. It's so important. It's an important part of your life. It's an important kind of joy to have in your life.
Yeah.
And you really need the right kind of person to be able to have that.
Yeah.
And so look for that person and enjoy it and take advantage.
But it's very different than the kind of chastity that a Christian or somebody like that would advocate for, which is going to be fundamentally anti-sex and anti-pleasure, and more oriented towards duty and or sex as kind of a animalistic thing that you have to control. And so
Right.
she's very pro-sex, and because she's very pro-sex, you shouldn't be promiscuous.
Right. And
That's because it's such an incredible value.
Yeah. And it just occurred to me, of course, we know she had an affair while she was married. So so I don't know what she would, I mean, that was a very unusual situation, and she handled it differently from how anyone else you ever heard of handled it, right? I mean, they talked about it. So
not surprising given who she was.
Given who she was. So I'd say the other thing that I think is important is so I'm going to state this in a negative. You also, self-deprivation is not okay. So I suspect that you can't put yourself into a state of suffering. And so I think that might have been a factor in her deciding to have an affair, even though, I mean, it was a difficult situation from what I understand.
Yes.
So, yep.
I'm sure. So Andrew says, what do you think is behind a generalized fear of making mistakes? It can become like all tasks take on a feeling of dread and inhibit action.
Well, I mean, what happens when you make a mistake? You criticize yourself or someone else criticizes you, right? And if you criticize yourself, I mean, you can really trigger self-doubt, right? I mean, this is what self-criticism triggers self-doubt. And self-doubt is an emotion. Self-esteem is not an emotion, I don't think. I don't know a feeling of self-esteem per se, although I do, there's a feeling of pride. But self-doubt is a definite feeling, and you can have lots of self-esteem and still feel self-doubt at times.
Yep.
And then you need to look at it and say, why am I thinking I can't do this? Like when you make a mistake, if you say, oh, you made a mistake, and you start generalizing in any way, you idiot, you made a mistake, you're saying that you're an idiot, right? you're generalizing about your character and your abilities. And that's the problem with self-criticism is if it turns into you're analyzing yourself as opposed to you're looking at what is getting in the way of my achieving my values now.
Mm-hmm.
It will send you off in a threat orientation and actually stop you from solving what the problem is. And and make it much worse and make you want to avoid it because you feel so terrible when you think about it. So I do think that there's a real phenomenon. If you criticize yourself, you will feel self-doubt. What should you do when you feel self-doubt? Introspect it. Figure out, is there some truth here? I mean, I can't tell you how important it is if you feel self-doubt to figure out, wow, I actually am lacking this skill. Wow, gee, other people have this skill and I don't have this skill. What am I going to do about that?
Yep.
Right? I mean, one of the, you asked if there was anything I wanted to cover. I had a couple of kinds of examples that like money is not always a value, right? Some people want money not because of a value orientation. And it's something like, for me, it was a surprise when I realized that, I don't know quite how to finish that sentence. It was a surprise to me to realize that I needed to learn marketing skills and that I needed to want to learn sales skills. And I actually think you can do this. That my view of motivation is if you decide, if you have a business, you need to value sales and marketing. If you do not value sales and marketing, you will not succeed. And I didn't value sales and marketing when I started my business. I kind of hated them. A lot of small business owners do. And you need to realize, wow, there's skills there that I don't have. There are values I need to learn. A lot of this stuff I know about trade is because I learned how to market and realized, that person needs to actually want what I'm giving. If I'm giving something that's not useful for them, they're not going to pay me. Okay, I need to really want to understand how to make this match. So I kind of lost the train of this. What was the original question? I'm sorry. I
think you drifted from the original question to some point you wanted to make
about money. What was the original question? Because
the question was the generalized fear of making mistakes.
Okay, right. So the positive point here is if you make a mistake, okay, there's only 3 cases.
Yep. Willful
evasion. Okay, that is a red alert. It's like, oh my God. And seriously, you actually think you evaded, you need to stop, reassess, think about how bad this is, and think about what the virtue is that you want to really try to reinforce, because it's going to kill you. It's going to destroy your soul. And you do it not because you're a bad person, but because you care about your soul and you want the virtues to help you. You want the honesty or whatever it is. And you redouble down on honesty. The second possibility was a dumb mistake. It was just, you caught it, you regret it, but okay, it's not metaphysically significant. And maybe you put in some practice so you don't get it. And the third case is it was a complete blinder. It's like, really? That was a mistake? And there, ta-da, you have now learned something about yourself. You've learned, wow, there's this whole gap. There's this whole thing. Other people can do this and I can't do this. And I didn't even know I didn't know how to do this. And it's really interesting. And that if this was in the way of you're trying to achieve a value, you now have identified an area where you can develop skill, knowledge, and values. And that is the first step. The first step is identifying that. So I think that's the way you turn that around. The fact that it happens, of course it happens. Threat-oriented motivation will happen. Self-criticism will happen. It's way easier to criticize than create. Way easier to criticize.
Yep. So Richard says, Yaron, would you hire Jean to do your marketing? She has domain expertise. I don't think I can afford Jean.
I wish that were true. Oh dear.
She's got way more interesting things to do.
Oh dear, that's funny. I'd be happy to talk with you about marketing, Yaron.
We can talk about
help
marketing.
each other.
All right. Proper says, are men wired evolutionarily to be very worried about physical combat, especially at younger ages? It seems athletic men are more socially confident than men who are weak or physically incapable.
So, first of all, I have no idea about any kind of biological thing like this, but there is an issue of, sexual self-esteem, right? And for men, it's masculinity is strength. That's kind of what that's about. You have more muscles. As I understand it, there are some biological differences, like boys are more active.
Mm-hmm.
And this is apart from any of the cultural stuff. So I don't think that, certainly no ideas are wired, but the fact that it goes this way, I mean, it's very interesting reading Darwin on sex selection. There really is, there's a big sex selection in humans, very big. And men were sex selected to be the hunters, and women were sex selected to be the gatherers and the nurturers. And we're physically different, and our brains are somewhat different. And I don't think it's a coincidence that men tend to be, if they have an error, it tends to be rationalism, and women, it tends to be empiricism. I do not think that's a coincidence. I think that's probably got some biological basis. And it is kind of consistent with the women being the nurturers, actually, because there you need to be more in tune with emotions.
Yep.
So, yeah, there's probably some biological, it doesn't matter. So this is the most important thing. It totally doesn't matter. You can be, I mean, I'm becoming an athlete in my 60s. I don't know if I'm actually going to rise to the level of athlete, but I am literally working on better athleticism, having been totally uncoordinated as a kid. No clue. I mean, it was really news to me when I was about 20 or so to find out that keep your eye on the ball is not just a joke. You actually need to keep looking at the ball. That was like a real surprise to me. Anyway, so it doesn't matter. You can change it. That's my view.
Hyperreason says, as an entrepreneur and intellectual inspired by Ayn Rand's portrayal of heroic intellectual doers, what insights can you offer to help me continue my journey towards achieving my own aesthetic ideal?
Your aesthetic ideal.
Yeah, I don't know what.
I don't know quite what that means. You mean like a look in the body or something? I think we need a clarification on what that means.
I'm not sure what aesthetic ideal means here. What's the context?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he'll clarify in a minute. We'll see.
Yes.
All right. Baker says, hi, Gene. Love your work. Please comment on how you think a good knowledge of objectivism can benefit practicing psychologists and psychiatrists in their work. Many thanks.
Oh, I don't know how they survive without it. So first of all, you need the whole idea of rational egoism, right? If you don't have the idea of rational egoism, how can you help people? I mean, how can you actually help people? Because if you think altruism is right, I mean, the person who really, well, I mean, there are objectivist therapists who could probably talk to this even more. I mean, Gina Gorlin and Ellen Kenner are the two that are coming to mind right now. But I'll just say, I mean, how do you do it without standards of what is the good? Because I do think that part of what you need to do as part of therapy or as part of coaching, I mean, I do coaching, but I don't do therapy. You need to challenge people when they say something that's irrational. If they say, I mean, I just had this in a coaching call, or someone was saying, well, I'm really unhappy because I'm never going to be able to get my family member to always approve of me. Yeah. Why do you want them to always approve of you? That's second-handed. That's going to kill you. If you set that as your goal, you're going to destroy yourself. And now, obviously, that's not what you would say in a therapy session, but I think you've got to know that in order to pull out the rational elements. So I totally think you need to know rational egoism and the importance of the virtues. The other thing is just the role of thinking. Actually, I'm going to say this. So this is why the best school of therapy is the cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's partly because they focus on the thoughts. And this is, if you do not understand the role of thoughts and emotions, and that thoughts can be wrong, and that you need to be able to know your thoughts and challenge them, how can you help anybody? That is the place where you have control. And of course, there are schools of therapy that are just terrible and don't get any results. Now, there are also other schools of therapy that are nuts and yet get results. So here's one. Since we were talking about sex, people are interested in sex. A book that I've read that's very interesting. It's called The Passionate Marriage by David Schnark. It's X-rated in places. I apologize. It's kind of embarrassing to recommend it. He's a sex therapist. And the advice is actually extremely interesting. But the theory is based on this school. I don't know the name of the school, but the person who started is Murray Bowen. And that school literally believes that the unit of reality is the collective. That you start with a family and you need to, they call it differentiate from the family. So you start not as an individual, but as a collective. And as part of maturity, you need to differentiate. Well, that is nuts, right? And because of this, the thing that they're actually looking at is how do you differentiate, which is how do you have relationships among independent people that are still close? And so there's actually some very interesting work on how to be close and intimate without having emotional, they call it emotional fusion, which is you feel exactly the same way about everything, which is not possible if you're independent. And so they've got actually some very interesting advice. How do I understand that? Because I have the objectivist ethics. I was able to look at it and say, okay, theory is all screwed up, but look at this. They're actually focusing on how to make the people independent. And I was able to pull out the value from it. So I don't know how anybody does anything without objectivism.
Yep. Andrew says, I find a lot of emotionally repressed people hide anger underneath a shallow positivity, as though it's wrong to be angry. Is that because they don't trust themselves? And how can that be depressed? De-repressed.
So I would never make a global generalization like that people hide their anger under a surface positivity because of, some reason.
There's a lot of people. He doesn't say everybody, but he's
well, no, but so it's individual. This is very important. So suppose there is one person. What is the reason again he gave for why they do this?
A lot of emotionally repressed people hide anger beneath a shallow positivity, though it's wrong to be angry.
Right, wrong to be angry.
Because they don't trust themselves.
Right. So first of all, there are a lot of people who think it's wrong to be angry. Why would they? So let's just take 3 reasons why they might think it would be wrong to be angry. So one person thinks it's wrong to be angry because every time they get angry, they lose all their friends. Another person thinks it's wrong to be angry because they were indoctrinated with that, which, there are certainly people who think that you should never get angry. I mean, yeah. There are households where nobody ever gets angry, right? It's not modeled by the parents. That was not my household when I was growing up.
Not mine.
Right. But it's definitely in some cultures, it's like, no, you're not supposed to do that. Let's come up with a third reason why you think you should never get angry. Well, you've got a kind of weird view that anger means you want to destroy people, and that's hatred, and that's out, right? So, you got to look and say, why does the person think they should never be angry? And it's going to be a different analysis for each one. It's going to be a different de-repression for each one. All de-repression happens by taking the emotion seriously and asking yourself, why do I feel this? What are the ideas underlying this? And if you don't get it and immediately, there are various tactics that can help you with that. Like leading questions where you can, like if you write down why you're blaming everybody, you can actually figure out like what the logic of it is. There are tactics that can help you do this. But you need to know the reason why you think you should never be angry. And you need to think about it in the context of some concrete situation. You do not solve these problems wholesale. You first see, gee, I seem to think that I should never be angry. And then you start noticing it in more places. And in each place, you figure out, well, what's the issue here? And in some places, you should be angry. And in fact, you need to judge people. And, fear of judging people. Altruist morality causes people to be afraid to judge people. They think it's immoral to judge people, which doesn't stop people from judging people, right? It doesn't stop people from having emotions or having lightning-like expectations of, bad things, or that seeing that they're going to be bad. But it can cause them to not act on that. And it's always an issue of you untangle this in concrete situations. You don't do it wholesale, you do it retail. You see this might be an issue, you start noticing, you introspect one at a time, you start noticing it more, you start getting some control over it.
Right, so Hyperreason says, where is it? What he means by aesthetic ideal is to be efficacious in the pursuit, attainment, and preservation of values, material and intellectual. So let's read that question again with that in mind. As an entrepreneur and intellectual inspired by Ayn Rand's portrayal of the heroic and intellectual doers, what insights can you offer to help me continue my journey towards achieving my own aesthetic ideal, which is
to be a hero in the world, right?
Achieving values, yes.
Right. So I have definite advice for this. You need a central purpose. You need a central purpose. If you need a real goal in the real world, something you want to create in the world, something that a central purpose needs to be long range, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years, lifetime. It doesn't matter. It needs to be about, I think, 3 years. It needs to be something that you will put at least 10 hours a week into, right? Something that is big, and you integrate your life around it. And it's the pursuit of a long-range goal, a long-range rational goal, creative goal that actually puts you into conflict because you have to grow to achieve an ambitious goal. And I did a talk at OCON on central purpose, which is up on ARI's site. And I've got on my website, on my blog, I've got a long version of that in the blog. One of the categories is a concept of central purpose, and it's got all the material from the talk plus about double that. And I strongly recommend you set and pursue a central purpose. That is how you grow yourself. And this is actually that same book, the David Schnark book. One of the things he talks about marriage, he says marriage is a people growing machine. And the reason is you fall in love because you're the same, and then you find out how you're different, and then you have to figure out how to navigate that. And to do that, you have to grow emotionally. You need to be okay with discomfort. You need to learn how to communicate better. You need to get clearer on your values. Marriage is a people growing machine. Goals, long-term, a central purpose is a people growing machine. It puts you into conflict. It makes you have to develop new skills, gain new knowledge, discover new knowledge, get more emotional control, get clearer on your values, change your priorities. That is what it is. And of course, this is why fighting for the future lets you live in it today, because if you are on the path of a long range, real world goal, you do have the experience of you acting, in effect, heroically in the short term, because you see yourself overcoming obstacles. You get tremendous pride just from that whole thing.
Great. So Mark says objectivism needs to identify a school of psychology and discuss it in depth. For now, there seems to be a lack of it. Right. I'm not sure what.
To develop a school of psychology? Is that
identify?
Well, right. So, okay. So this is not an easy thing, right? It's not like there's a school of psychology out there that's right. Okay. So this is a problem of induction. I've been working this problem. I know Gina's working this problem. We're all working this problem. So it's not like you can just do this instantaneously.
You mean that the knowledge just doesn't pop into your head? You just don't know this stuff?
It's hard work. I mean, just take the topic of this call. I just have to say this.
Yeah.
Ayn Rand talks about motivation by love in God's speech.
Yep.
Leonard Peikoff talks about it in OPAR. Nobody was making a huge big deal about this until I gave my talk at OCON,
Yep.
5 or 6 years ago. It takes, just because you even hear that this is important, seeing how this fits. Let me give the money example. Because I think, people say, oh, yeah, I want to make money. That's a value. Well, why do you want to make money? You got to go all the way down. Money is not a deep rational value. Money is a tool of exchange. Well, why do you want to do that? Well, because I want to have these things.
Nice things. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's also not a deep rational value. Why do you want those things? And so you get to something like comfort or something like that, which is not, comfort is not the biggest value, right? I mean, it's nice. Comfort is nice, but it's not, right? And, like one of the things I learned, I needed to actually value money. What happened there? Stop. I needed to actually value money. I think you value money because you went into finance. You like making money, right,
Yeah.
Yaron? Yeah.
Well,
I
like the challenge of the making. It's less about the money. It's more about the making.
More about the making and figuring out how the markets work. And isn't
Yep.
that fascinating? This uses my brain, right?
Yep.
And that's people who go into finance or hedge funds and things tend to do that. Well, I didn't go into any of that. And I needed to find my own selfish reason for making money. And I'll tell you, my selfish reason for making money is if people pay me for my stuff, this means that I figured out how to explain it so they get some value out of it. And it's like, this is an objective test of, have I gotten the explanation clear enough? And that is really motivating to me. And I want to make money. But I tell you, it took a hell of a lot of work to figure that out, even though any business class will tell you, you've got to make money. And like, yeah, I got to make money. Why? How do you have a value orientation to that? It's not trivial. None of it is trivial. And I read on my site the happiness series, the value series, and the central purpose series. There is the starting of something based on objectivism there.
All right, so we've gone 2.5 hours. Ian has a comment which will serve well as our finale. He says, your answers are very empowering. Thank you.
That means a lot to me. It
should. Good. Well, thank you, Jean. It's always a pleasure. These are always
fun. Thank you, Yaron.
fun.
Yes, totally my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Look forward to next time.
All right, great. Take care.
Good week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everybody.